Today we'll be looking at Bloom through the experience of three main user personas. Using this subway map as a reference, we will begin with a venture owner requesting and receiving an invitation to Bloom. Then we will follow them through venture onboarding. Following the developer through this user journey of onboarding an application, and then we'll switch gears a bit and look at the CTO persona reviewing the security posture of their application. For this first user journey, we will follow a venture owner requesting and receiving an invitation to Bloom, and then continue through the Bloom onboarding process. So this request form allows users to complete instant self-service onboarding. So we'll go ahead and enter the relevant details. So immediately we receive a confirmation email, and then shortly thereafter, we'll receive an email inviting us to complete the identity verification process. So identity verification is central to Bloom's onboarding process. So now that the identity has been validated, we can receive and accept the invitation to the Bloom platform. We'll complete our registration by creating a password and security question, accepting the terms and conditions, and creating the account. So our sandbox cloud environment has now been created with Bloom's security controls baked right into it. In this section of our demo, we're beginning at an empty dashboard because we've just created the account and nothing's yet been deployed. What we will be exploring is how a developer gets their code deployed using Bloom. We will be deploying a WordPress instance. So in order to begin, we'll need either CloudFormation or Terraform infrastructure as code and one or more Docker containers. These can either be self-hosted or in Docker Hub. We'll also need the credentials to access those containers. So the first thing we do is name our application. Now, Bloom is focused today on CD for our customers with plans for continuous integration in the future. So we have the option to choose CloudFormation or Terraform, two popular IAC tools. We'll be using CloudFormation. The next step here is to connect to our code repository. For the demo, we'll be using GitHub, which is a pretty popular one. This uses a secure connection so that Bloom can begin looking into the repository and reading files securely. So the venture can indicate that they just want a specific repository to be able to be read. So after that connection has been set up, the next step is to select the base application infrastructure file. This can also take a folder containing the Terraform files. I do have a config parameter that I need to use, so I will enter that after selecting the infrastructure file. Now this looks right to me, so I will confirm and initiate the creation of the pipeline that will run when it's time to deploy. This kicks off an initial release that I can view the logs for. I'm going to go ahead and continue application creation. The next step, I'm asked whether I want to migrate my database schema or not. For this particular application, that's not needed, but it is something that Bloom supports. The next step is to add our service. So part of defining a service is selecting or creating a connection to Docker so that the pipeline can automate pushing the container image. This can be set up with either Docker Hub or a privately hosted Docker registry. So I'm going to enter those credentials here. Once that connection has been added, I will also indicate the namespace and repository for the Docker image. And then lastly, I will select the infrastructure file for this service. So adding a service adds a stage to our application's pipeline. This enables the base app as well as the services to be continuously managed and deployed moving forward. Any future updates to this image or the infrastructure files will cause the pipeline to run again. So we are now ready to deploy. Deploying with Bloom makes a difference because security and compliance are really baked in every step of the way. So now that we've got that all deployed, we're going to be looking at the CTO persona. For this, we'll go to the venture dashboard in a venture with a few applications deployed. So there are a wide variety of vulnerabilities and configuration issues that can make an app insecure at the infrastructure level or at the application level. Looking at our first donut here, our dev donut, this gives us an idea at the environment level what kind of vulnerabilities we're looking at. we want to take a closer look at the vulnerabilities specific to our application we just deployed. So we're going to go ahead and find our application. Here we can see the severity level for these vulnerabilities. We're going to dive in a bit deeper and get some details about this specific vulnerability. So going back to the application dashboard, here's also where you can see any outputs that have been defined. You can see the status of all the services that are running, as well as outputs that were defined for those specific services. For the WordPress app we deployed, one of our outputs here is the URL that we actually need to access it. If we go to that URL, we're in. So next we'll look at our SecDonut. This shows at the infrastructure level for the environment what compliance looks like. So this is taking bank-grade security and codifying them so that any venture running on Bloom can have that level of security and develop at velocity. We're going to dive in and look at some common policy violations that have been implicated actually in some real-world breaches. As an example, this app has a couple of big issues. It has an S3 bucket with public access enabled, and that same S3 bucket is also not encrypted. So as a developer, if I can see that this is currently violating the policy controls and I go in and fix that in the code base, the pipeline that was provisioned earlier will enable Bloom to automatically detect that change and deploy it to Sandbox. So that's where the continuous deployment really comes into play. Something that's on our roadmap in the future is to auto-remediate some of these policy violations. Now, the last donut we'll be looking at is the ops donut. This shows our cloud utilization against our remaining budget. In the future, we have plans to greatly expand this functionality. For instance, giving a view into things like velocity of code pushes or the time frame between manual remediations. In summary, deploying with Bloom makes a difference because security and compliance are really baked in at every step.